How does the sacroiliac joint affect your back pain? Well, let's kick this off with a really quick challenge. Right now, move your left sacroiliac joint. Can you do it? Yes, it was a bit tongue-in-cheek, but in this video we're going to talk seriously about how your sacroiliac joint becomes injured, how it influences back pain, and more importantly, what you can do to fix that effectively and really dispel some confusion around this particular joint. And if you do find these videos really helpful, then consider subscribing to the channel or sharing them with someone you know that's been struggling with their sacroiliac joint as well. Let's get into this video. So let's hold the spine the right way up now. The sacrum, which is this orange bit down here, connects to these two white bits, which essentially are your pelvic bones or called your ilium. Now, this joint forms the sacroiliac joint, and that is a way of transmitting force as it comes through the lumbar spine. It goes out through these sacroiliac joints and then into the hips and then down onto the legs and vice versa as well. This is a bidirectional joint. Force going up and down the spine here. But it is very similar to another joint in your body, which is equally difficult to move. Let's think about your tibiofibular joint, down by your knee on the outside of your leg. Just like the sacroiliac joint, this tib-fib joint is a joint that we don't have conscious control over. It's very difficult to move. It starts to move when other joints, the knee, the hip, the leg bones in general, and the ankle are all moving in different ways, and they focus stress to that particular joint. And the sacroiliac is exactly the same. So if you've got a joint, say you've got your elbow or you've got your shoulder and you want to rehab it, you work on the muscles that protect that joint. You might move that joint through certain ranges, but with your sacroiliac joint, you just can't do that. It's not possible. So these joints are a fibrous type of joints. They're not the same as the ball and sockets in the shoulder that I mentioned a moment ago, or some of the hinge joints at the elbow or knee. And therefore, they're just there to allow a little bit of movement, a little bit of spring as weight is going up and down the spine. And in the case of the sacroiliac joint, its stability or mobility is intrinsically linked to the position of the lumbar spine, which we'll get to a little bit more in this video. Before I get into the details around how we injure the sacroiliac joint, let's talk about the one example where, yes, you've just strained your sacroiliac joint. And that's going to be the sort of thing where you're sat, you've got no history of back pain, you're sat on a flight, it's 16 hours, you've got one leg crossed over the other, you've put a lot of strain and buckling through that sacroiliac joint for 16 hours, you get up and it's a little bit stiff and inflamed. Yes, in that scenario, 100%, you've strained your sacroiliac joint, it's going to be flared up, it's going to be the primary cause of the problem or the primary problem, and that's just going to settle down really quickly. But most of you guys watching the videos that we do on YouTube are really people that have had a longer history of back pain. So that example is not you. So we've been talking around the houses, let's get down to the nuts and bolts of it. The sacroiliac joint is there, as we mentioned earlier, to compress, to aid force transference if we're about to carry a heavy load or we're about to really exert force through this pathway. And in that case, we get a slight extension through the lumbar spine that locks up this joint and allows for really solid force transference straight through. And that's where we jam up and consciously jam up those sacroiliac joints as part of engaging those muscles and that spinal chain to really exert force, power, or carry a heavy load. So the second way in which we move those sacroiliac joints is we unload them. We increase mobility, and that's as we're rounding, as we're bending forwards, as the leg's coming up, we disengage, we flatten that lumbar lordosis, and we disengage these sacroiliac joints a little bit. It provides a little bit more smooth motion to go through this chain and allow that range of motion through the hips, so that the really mobile hips get their motion dampened a little bit at the sacroiliac, and then it transmits through the spine. These chains are really, really important, and the sacroiliac is acting as either a point of stability in the case of load bearing or as a point of flexibility in dampening that excessive or vastly greater range of motion in the hips. Now you'll see from those two examples that the stability, which is important at times, or the mobility, which is equally important at times, is affected by the lumbar position, the lumbar curve, and how this is working, whether we've engaged some of these strong muscles down here or whether we're using a little bit more flexibility. And that's a really important point for later on. But what about leg lengths? Yes, if we've all heard about one leg being longer than the other, that sort of thing, as we're moving and shifting weight from one foot to the other, that can have an impact. And those with a significant leg length difference, one leg being objectively longer or shorter than the other, will have a little bit more pressure going through one of the sacroiliacs than the other, and a little bit more mobility through the other one. There are some nuanced differences here because sometimes we compensate by shifting our body left and right to compensate for that, but that is a consideration that we're not going to go into too much detail in this video. Very briefly talking about topics of leg lengths, yes, there are ways in which we can establish objectively that one leg bone, or the combination of leg bones of the femur and the tibia, are longer or shorter than in the other side. But all too often people will go and see their physical practitioner, whether it's a chiropractor, an osteopath, a physiotherapist, or anyone else, And they'll say, oh, your leg on the bench and one leg's longer than the other. That's so inaccurate. It's not helpful. And often the fixing the leg lengths and making one shorter or longer again is really not a very it's not a very objective way of looking at these things, and you don't really know if you're fixing or actually making things worse. Very, very important consideration to think about. And if you've got any questions about this, post in the comments below. It is a topic that we could explore in a numerous sort of series of videos rather than just this one. So what should you do if you are struggling with sacroiliac joint pain? Well, hopefully by now you understand that the sacroiliac joint is really at the mercy of the outside influences, those above and those below, and particularly in the case of stability, excess compression, or flexibility, straining, instability. It is really at the mercy of what this lumbar spine is doing. And we find, as we talk about a lot in the Back in Shape program and on this YouTube channel, we say that in a lot of cases of lower back pain, we've got a reduction in the curve. That means we create a degree of instability in these joints so they can get strained. But you're not going to fix the sacroiliac joint. You're not going to do anything to the sacroiliac joint because it's the bit that's failed because these structures are not being supported and protected. So what we really need to do is focus on restoring the normal alignment, the normal structure, the normal support, more importantly and more urgently, for that lumbar spine so it can function effectively. And then also invariably there's a degree of hip and leg muscle spasm associated with these sorts of things. We think of things like sciatica pain that will often go down the leg and result in muscle spasm in the glutes, etc. We want to also keep those things nice and mobile as well, so they can move nicely and the hips can move freely, so they're not creating a tension point at the sacroiliac joint that's having to do a bit more work. Yes, we can get a bit of ice on this area, we can calm down the inflammation on this area, but you're not going to fix that pain by just trying to address the sacroiliac joint. We have to look at the things that control and affect the sacroiliac joint rather than trying to focus on the sacroiliac joint itself. So to wrap this thing up, the sacroiliac joint is a really complicated or misunderstood joint. It is the thing that goes because the things above the lumbar spine and below, the hips and other load-bearing structures below there, are not working properly. And if we really want to fix it, we want to get in and address predominantly the lumbar spine to support that structure, make sure that we've got the right sort of exercises to protect and support a neutral lumbar spine and not focusing excessively on flattening the lumbar spine. That's really, really important, and that's a core principle of the Back in Shape program. So if you need any help and you're struggling with the sacroiliac joint, head over there. There'll probably be a card above my head somewhere that you can click and learn more about the Back in Shape program. But that is the kind of thing that's going to help you. Going through a regimented process that's based on the way in which the spine really works and how the lumbar spine influences the sacroiliac joints and the hips and vice versa. That's what will really help you fix your sacroiliac joint, especially if it's associated with that lumbar pain. Thanks so much for watching the video this far. Hopefully you did find it really helpful and maybe it changed some of your perceptions over this joint and how the sacroiliac joint can affect your lower back pain. All too often there's so much focus on the sacroiliac and not enough on the actual lumbar spine, and they're treated or spoken about as if the two are worlds apart and don't have any impact on one another at all, and by just addressing the sacroiliac joint everything is going to fix itself. Hopefully this video has really given you that insight in what you can do to help your back pain and your SIJ pain and really get onto the road to recovery as soon as possible. If you found this video helpful, please do consider giving us a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button so you make sure you stay up to date with any new videos that come out, and we look forward to seeing you next time with another video. If you want to learn more about the premium Back in Shape membership, there's going to be a video somewhere underneath here. And if you want to stay up to date or tune into some of our more recent live streams and the Q&As at the end of those, then that's going to be down here. And remember, you can subscribe to the channel up here and hit the notification bell to make sure you know when we next go live so you can join us for our next live stream and Q&A.